Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, all the good things. I'm coming to you from Indianapolis, Indiana, where it is a balmy 4 degrees outside, the glorious 3 inches of snow here. So, hope you are in a place where you're ready to learn. We have some great leaders here today for our discussion, both within our audience and as guests. So, the premise of the show is twofold. First, by way of my background, and this will make a little bit more sense, I'm the president of the Change Architects. And for the past 11 years, we've really focused on the intersections of leadership, change management, digital transformation. What does it take for a group, a team, an individual, an entire organization to come together to transform their organization? That's been our specialty. And because of that specialty, I've come to see and value the value, not to be redundant, the value of learning. And one of our guests, Isaac, added this too. Leaders are learners, but they're teachers, they're mentors, right? Folks are coming to you as a leader, looking to you to help them make sense of the future, to make sense of the chaos at hand, so that you all can make your way through it as an organization, as a team. And as a leader, that can feel like pressure. It can also be an amazing opportunity. And so we wanted to bring together our leaders, digital transformation leaders, leaders who are in our audience, to come and learn from each other and learn from some of the top digital transformation podcast hosts out there. We literally found a list and we just started with number one. And that's what we got here, y'all, is like the top leaders from that list to tell you about how are they staying on top of trends when it relates to digital transformation, so that you have some more go-to resources to bring digital transformation to life, to create the future of your organization. And your team doesn't know who your team doesn't have to know who your secret whisperers are, but we hope that you invite them into the Institute, into our digital dialogues, into our leading digital host that Robert Field also hosts for us. And to overlay why we're doing this episode in the way that we are, the Institute is launching the Digital Transformation Broadcast Network. There we go, digitaltransform.tv. It's coming in March. If you go to that now or right after the show, we hope that you'll sign up for the wait list for when it is ready, because as leaders, you need a go-to place to find your people, find your resources, find trusted resources, trusted voices in this very noisy area of content. And this digital broadcast network is going to be that for you, for our leaders. So that's why we're overlaying kind of the launch of our broadcast network with bringing you even more thought leaders in digital transformation today. All right, so my friends, let's bring on our guests, so you can get to meet these experts if you don't know them already. And afterwards, you will also get links to their show so you can sign up or subscribe directly in your podcast player of choice. All right. So, first up, we're going to bring in Lauren Livak Gilbert. Hello, Lauren. All right. Tell us about yourself, not to sound like Austin Powers.
I love it. Will do. Thank you for having me, Stefanie. Really great to be here. Hi, everyone. Lauren Livak Gilbert. I'm the executive director of the Digital Shelf Institute and co-host to Unpacking the Digital Shelf. Also started another small podcast called Commerce Trailblazers. So 2 podcasts in the mix. I have about 10 years of digital transformation expertise. When preparing for this, I actually had to think about that. And I was like, wow, that's a long time being in the space. So learned a lot. 3.5 years in podcasting. So have really loved being a part of this medium. It's a great opportunity. And I was thinking about digital transformation before I was coming on the show, and I was thinking about how challenging it really is. And the reason for that is because organizations have been doing the same things for hundreds of years. And e-commerce, commerce, digital is really only about 31 years old. Let that sink in there for a second. So we haven't been doing it for that long.
Yes.
And I think education, 2 elements of education are really important, both internal education about how you work as a company, and then external education around the context of what's happening in the space, which I think is where podcasts and things like this really come into play. So excited to be a part of the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. All right. Next in is our friend Isaac Sacolick. Isaac, welcome in, sir.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So tell us about, I keep saying this, tell us about yourself, sounding like Austin Powers. Introduce yourself, Isaac.
Sure. It's nice to meet everybody. Best thing to know about me is I sat in the seat of being a CTO and a CIO for almost 20 years. I started my transformation journey back in the 90s, helping newspapers go from print to digital. The term
Oh,
digital transformation didn't exist. And talk about lifelong learning and teaching. I started my blog in 2005 when my startup was a social startup. And someone said to me, Isaac, it's not plugged into the blogosphere. And I was like, I should write a blog, which was not the advice I was actually getting. That blog has over 700 articles on it. I also write for CIO.com. I write for InfoWorld. I have a channel on LinkedIn called the Coffee with Digital Trailblazers. Meet every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. That's also a live program. I have a YouTube channel called the Driving Digital Stand Up. It's exactly what it sounds like, 10 to 15 minutes of basic learning around a practice. And I run a company called Star CIO. We have two different programs, one for CIOs, Chief Digital and Data Officers, that are lifelong learning, transformation, leadership, advisory programs, all about educating the staff around how to accelerate transformation. And then we have programs for technology companies about reaching their target audience. So great to meet everybody here.
wow. Wow. What all the expertise you're bringing to the world. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Next up, Caleb Masters. Come on in, sir.
Hello, Stephanie and everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm Caleb Masters. I've been working in podcasts for more than 13 years. Kind of crazy when you think about it, that context. And then about 8 of those years working on podcasts related to digital transformation. So from 2017 to 2021, I hosted and produced HR Break Room, which was an HR podcast that covered a lot of topics related to the digital transformation of HR and leadership in that space. And then from 2021 to 2023, hosted the Masters of Digital Transformation podcast, which was a podcast that was dedicated to helping, CIOs, CTOs, digital transformation leaders within the supply and demand planning space. So a lot of conversations about technology, always a pleasure to do it. And currently I'm doing a lot of consulting and content production related to all sorts of different topics, digital transformation among many of those. So I'm always excited to talk podcast, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I think I appreciate the invitation. I think now is a great time to be talking about how leaders learn from podcasts. The channel has never been more popular than before. There's never been more ways to consume podcasts.
Yes.
There's never been more podcasts produced, frankly.
Yep.
Where you could even argue we're teetering on oversaturation, but sort of the upside of that is there is a podcast dedicated to every niche. Sure, you've got your mega hit podcast, but if you want to learn about any specific area of digital transformation in a specific vertical or industry, there is a show out there for you. And AI is actually making that even move even faster. So anyway, great time to be here. I love to talk podcast and digital transformation.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to talk AI here in a little bit. And my latest joke with AI is, if this was an evening activity, we could make this a drinking game. How many times does AI come up? It's the term du jour of 2025. All right. Next in, Eric Kimberling. Come on in, sir.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for having me here today. And nice to see you all. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm with a company called Third Stage Consulting Group. And we're an independent consulting firm, tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with their digital transformations. So whether they're going through a digital strategy, doing the implementation planning, or actually executing against that plan, we'll help them through the entire life cycle of their digital transformations. I'm relatively new to podcasting. It sounds like I might be the new guy on the block, the rookie here in the group, but maybe I'll have a different perspective as a result. But I started my primary podcast 4 years ago, and that podcast is called Transformation Ground Control. At transformationgroundcontrol.com. And then after that, just in the last year, I started 2 offshoots, sort of back to Caleb's point about super targeted podcasts. I wanted to have a couple limited series, limited run sorts of podcasts that focused on specific niches within the digital transformation space. So I have another one called Journey to S04HANA, which is for clients that are in the process of trying to migrate to SAP S4HANA. and
Mm.
another one called Journey to D365, which is specifically for companies that are trying to migrate to Microsoft Dynamics 365. So I totally agree with what Caleb just said. Everything you said about AI, niches, all that stuff. I think podcasting might be oversaturated, but it's also an opportunity to reach a very targeted audience too. So glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. What two great examples, and Lauren's too, of just very niche material for specific times in a company's and leaders' journey. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. All right. So my friends, this is called the digital dialogue, which means we dialogue. This is a conversation, not just among the 5 of us here, but all of you listening in. So if at any time you have a question, add a comment in chat, whatever it is, we'll read it out. We'll answer it either in real time or towards the end, just depending on the show flow. But we want to make sure you feel heard, and we hope that you get value from our conversation and subscribe to our friends here's podcasts, as they've mentioned, and John, our producer, will get you those details at the end as well. So, my friends, last time I was with Digital Dialogue was October. October was National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're talking about podcasting, which is a transformation of radio, basically, right? Like, what can we celebrate in February by way of radio? Actually, February is National Women's Inventor Month. And so there's a lot of great inspiration to pull from. So, in case you haven't heard of Miss 𝗗𝗄 she was a very beautiful woman who was an actress who by night invented amazing things. And this specific invention, she had a co-inventor, George Antheil, and they invented a radio guidance system. So this was about pre-World War II, beginning of World War II. They co-invented a radio guidance system for Allied torpedoes that used spread spectrum and frequency hopping technology to defeat the threat of radio jamming by Axis powers. So basically, what technology did exist at the time was they knew where torpedoes were. But if the Allies knew where their torpedoes were, that means that the Axis forces, the Nazis, knew where the torpedoes were as well. Her and her co-inventor, mostly her, go on the record and say mostly her, invented the technology that jammed that signal so that only the owner of the torpedo could know where the torpedo was. So big shout out to Miss 𝗗𝗄, who brought that into the world, and all those other amazing radio frequency technologies that evolved during World War II that have brought us to the ability to have podcasting today, because transformation is evolution. So let's get into this conversation. Just so my friends know listening, I've hosted the Hot Mess Hotline for the past 4 years as a podcast host, showing up with other podcasters. I had to bring my A game. I had to put on the real headphones, the real mic, so I sounded like the real deal with everybody here, all these pros. Hot Mess Hotlines is focused on conversations with top-level technology leaders about the realness, the hardness of driving transformation, driving change inside of organizations. We focus on conversations around resilience, proactivity, critical thinking, decision-making, problem solving. It's been one of the highlights of my professional career to bring those voices to others so that we could learn from other leaders. My kind of hot take on the intersection of digital transformation and podcasting is centered around this statement that seems to lead every blog post out there around digital transformation. And it begins with, according to McKinsey, or according to fill in the blank, 70% of digital transformation and large change initiatives fail. That's supposed to be the good news that we start education with.
Definitely heard that one before.
Right. And why is it still true? And this is my stance is, y'all, it doesn't have to be true. We have so many thought leaders that are leading the way, that are putting their trials and tribulations out in the world for us to hear from and learn from. Let's get that stat down to like 30% of digital transformation initiatives fail, because, and this is an oversimplification, there are no more excuses. There's so many great places to learn, y'all. There's so many great consultants and experts who have gone before us. Let's change that statistic.
Stefanie, can I add something to that really quickly? Because I just think it might be relevant.
Yes.
Digital transformation is not a place that you're getting to. Like it doesn't end. And I know a lot of people don't like that concept, but like you're always going to be digitally transforming. So it's not like you're getting to a milestone and it's over. And I think hopefully if we can change that mindset, we can change the stat.
Yes. Great point. Great
And
point.
it's fascinating too that it just hasn't budged at all. Not only has it not come down to 30%, like you said, Stephanie, but it's just there's no indicator that number is coming down over the last 20, 25 years or whatever. I've been seeing that same number for McKinsey has been 70 or 80%, I feel like, for decades.
Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah. Let's change that. Let's in 10 years have this podcast conversation again, or whatever medium we're on. Lord only knows what it's called. Yeah.
Holograms.
Yes. And we'll turn the number 70% digital transformations fail into that'll be the drinking game of the time. So not AI. It will turn 70%.
I have a drink every time the word digital transformation fails. Got it.
Oh man, that's gonna be so much fun. All right, let's get into the conversation here. So, as I stated at the beginning, leaders are learners. As a leader, you're also a mentor and a teacher. Thank you, Isaac, for bringing that up when we're planning.
You're welcome.
All right, but people are looking to you as the thought leader in their ecosystem, and so this conversation has been designed to set you up so that you have thought leaders to also look for in your ecosystem in very intentional ways. And podcasting is a more unique medium, something that's been brought to life in the recent decade or so that allows us to take our learning in more portable ways than ever, right? Like folks listen to podcasts while they're working out, while they're doing the dishes, commuting across town or up the stairs, right? It's this very accessible format to learn. And the reason I love podcasting is I feel like it's a set of more intimate conversations. You get to hear things, you get to hear from leaders in a way that you don't get to in other channels or other mediums. And so by its nature, I feel like podcast is more intimate. It draws us closer and it can create community, which we'll talk about in a second. And so that just allows us to learn in more unique ways as well. I'm not going to say very unique because that's redundant, but it really is this beautiful form. And bear with me, friends, I'm looking at my notes here, but it really is this very beautiful form of media because it allows us to learn and teach and mentor and connect in new ways. And so here's my first question. And this is going to go out to Lauren because I know she's passionate about that, but about this. There's a lot of content out there to consume every day, right? Like you just go on LinkedIn and within 5 minutes, you're going to see 1,000 different pieces of content. Where do you go? You're a leader in this space. Where are you going to learn in this industry?
I love this question. Thank you, Stephanie. I mean, I think of this question in two ways. One, similar to Isaac, I was on the brand side for many years. So I was like in the weeds doing the digital transformation. And now I'm on the other side where I'm helping brands do that transformation. And I have to say, both sides, for me, it was having conversations with people. So talking to people who are doing the work, talking to brands, getting out there, having conversations, connecting with people. So I used LinkedIn to consume information, but also to find other people to connect with, to be able to have those chats, because it broadens your horizons and it gives you the opportunity to really talk to other people who are doing similar things to you. I think all of us would agree that this is a niche space. And so I kind of call it therapy when you're talking to other people. So you can ask the same questions and be like, did you hear what this retailer did about this? Or how are you dealing with it? So for me, I do a lot of connecting. And then I do use LinkedIn to follow people who I'm interested in learning from. And I think the other thing that's really important, because it's so busy and there's so much going on, put time on your calendar to actually learn. So I put 10 minutes every morning on my calendar. Nobody can bother me. I don't answer emails. And I either read an article that I've set aside, I go on LinkedIn, I connect with someone for 10 minutes, I listen to a podcast, figure out a way to kind of really build it into your schedule so that it's easier and it becomes more of a habit than a have to do kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, so good. To play off of this, any form of media, it's really easy to just consume the info, right? Like we think by the very nature of having the headphones in our ears that we are going to get the info, but that's not comprehension. That's not actually learning. That's just noise kind of coming in our heads. Same with the article. And I'm going to turn this over to Caleb too, especially because he's worked kind of cross-functionally here. How do you take what you're learning from listening to podcasts and actually implement them in the real world?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to another age-old sort of like saying we've probably all heard of it a lot of times. People process technology when it comes to adopting new strategies, new
Mm,
tech,
yeah.
changing the way we're working. And so whenever I find a new piece of tech, especially if you're doing like some sort of production software, or you're trying to find efficiencies and you're looking at what's the latest and greatest. On an individual level, I try to go through and assess, okay, like what is this technology? Let me take a look at the process I've built. Processes are super important as a producer. Making sure everything is running like a well-oiled machine at a specific sort of cadence is really important to the work I do.
Mm,
So looking at, hey, where does this technology fit in? Where could it fit in? Should it fit in? And what would it replace or what would it add? I think are
mhm,
two big questions I come up with on an individual level. So once I've sort of determined, okay, here is technology that I think could be a value add. We've seen this a ton in terms of like podcasting since the COVID. I mean, all these remote recording technologies, including the one we're on right now, StreamYard. Like this is a tool that was not necessarily working well for people before massive digital transformations. So
mhm.
once I determine the tech and the process, especially if you're working either leading a team or you're working with peers or collaborators. A big thing, I think the biggest challenge oftentimes is, hey, how do I show that the value that this change can make to the
The
work we're
value.
doing?
Mhm.
Right. All right. So
Yes.
and then it becomes a point of like, really your people skills, like being able to demonstrate, here's how it works. Here's the savings we could have or efficiencies we could, expect if we do this, or here's how much more we could produce if we're working with the tech. So I always go back to the people, process, and technology, but I really think
Mhm.
the people component, changing the mindset shift of the people who are actually going to be doing the work is probably the most important and often the most challenging step. We go back to why is that stat not changed? Why do digital transformations fail? And a common theme I've heard across multiple podcasts is the biggest challenge is getting the people on board with the
Yes.
change in this sort of time frame that we need them to get on board in order for this to be a success.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Your comments remind me of two things. One is the Cal Newport has a newer book out called Slow Productivity, and he talks a lot about the need when you're considering new work to consider the overhead that comes with the work.
Right.
Most of us don't take that into consideration, and maybe I mean you, but really I just mean me. It may be a few simple steps of work. It may be 3 to 5 hours worth of work across a month, not a big deal. Or, you have to slow down your processes so you can learn a new piece of technology, not a big deal. But then when you need to collaborate with your colleagues and have a meeting to discuss or figure out how to work it into a new workflow or an old workflow, that's all overhead that takes up time that we're not budgeting because we had this other new idea around something. And again, I'll use the word royal we here. I'm imagining some of you can that resonates with. If it doesn't, it's just me. But that's usually how it goes, especially in organizations.
Well, and you hit on one thing there that I think is really important to consider too. I think sometimes, especially when you're adopting new technologies or new processes,
Mhm.
slowing down a little bit to figure out how to integrate that and taking that time on the front end to get the people on board
Yes.
oftentimes is going to make the entire thing more productive and efficient in the long run. If you take a little more, you slow down a little bit and you take a little more time at the beginning, make sure everyone's on the same page about what's the strategy, how is this tech going to, change things, what can we expect to see, and you can sort of cast that vision and lead it with confidence early on. You're not necessarily going to run to that, 3 steps down the road, or hey, we need to get this release out. Well, all of a sudden there's all these opinions I didn't account for at the
Mhm.
11th hour, and now we're in a much bigger, sort of problem. Because then maybe it's like, well, then the technology doesn't work as designed, and then whoops, we have a failure. Let's go back to doing it how we've always done it.
Yes, absolutely. Um, just to stay on this topic around learning and the time it takes to learn for just a little bit longer, Isaac, I want to cue you up, but as a leader, because you're a thought leader in this space for so many, and I have two questions for you actually. But the first one is, as a leader, what's your responsibility for creating time for learning? How do you think about that?
Well, I might be an outlier. I mean, my learning is teaching, it's sharing,
Mm-hmm.
it's having conversations. It's being in front of people. You know, it's a big part of what I do is figuring out how to take some technology jargon that an analyst firm came up with and simplifying it so people understand what is it? Is it important to me? Should I care about this thing? It's about creating a shared understanding around some practice methodology. You know, you talk about digital transformation struggling for a long period of time. You know, Agile's been struggling for a long period of time. I just recently read some research about teams still struggling with what Agile means. And the reason is that because as we share a lot more, as we learn a lot more, as we write a lot about more different things, different ideas come to people about what digital transformation is. Is it moving to the cloud? Is it building user experiences out?
Yes.
Is it changing the business model? It's all those things. And is Agile, you know, is it, you know, stand-ups and scrums and all these different ceremonies? Yes, it's all these things. But now I have 10 different vernaculars or frameworks shared by 100 different people in the organization that mean different things. And so it's not just about having the conversation. If all it was is about having a conversation, then that number at 70% would be lower. What it really is about is getting everybody's input to step out of their comfort zone and sharing what these different things mean to them. What does it make them think of doing differently? What does a security problem mean to a developer? It's going to be very different than what it means to a product manager.
Yes.
So that to me is the conversation that we need to orchestrate as teachers, as learners. And what I suggest to all the people who are learning out there, the best way to teach is to do a little bit of getting out of your comfort zone and teaching a little bit. Share your opinion, knowing that you're going to get some feedback. Sometimes that feedback is easy to consume, and sometimes it's going to make you walk away and really rethink your belief systems and your values. So get used to that. That's what learning and teaching is all about.
Yes. And friends, so I've been in the learning and development space for 12, 15 years now. The number one way to learn and have it stick is to teach other people. And so for yourself, you know, to Isaac's point, force yourself to teach a perspective to your colleagues, to your teammates, to a lunch and learn, whatever that is, because by creating that curriculum, by teaching that opportunity, you're forcing comprehension into your brain and it sticks. And so that would be a great, you know, that's my learning tool. Is the number one way to learn and have it be retained by your teammate is have folks teach things to others. And then Isaac, just to double down on what you said, shared understanding. We throw out so many jargony words and we assume, and it really is lazy a communication, but it also creates confusion very quickly. Shared understanding on strategy, definition, using podcast leaders to create that shared understanding. Say, here's the perspective that we follow. Here are our thought leaders that are important to our organization, can help build that. Is something I would just add to what you just shared. So you've been in that seat, you've been in that CTO seat, and your clients are coming to you. What's your advice? And then I'm going to turn it over to Eric for a hot second, but what's your advice for sharing what you're learning with your team? You know, you're a sitting CIO, CDO. What's your advice for getting that learning down into the rest of the organization?
Yeah, I have two pieces of advice I share consistently with C-levels. Number one is there should really be only one individual goal when you start thinking about career, professional development, setting goals for the year. And that is, what is your learning goal for the year?
Yeah.
Everything else that we do in the organization today is teamwork. We're collaborating, we're sharing, we're developing together, we're doing data science together. There's very little that we do individually. So I'm looking at what the organization's goals are, check. What are the team's goals, check. But when I'm talking to an individual, what are you signing up to learn? And how are you demonstrating what you're learning? So that's the very first thing. Make sure you set learning goals. It's still early in the year. Everybody should have learning goals for the year. Yes. Everybody should have development goals for the year. And number two, like you already said it, lunch and learns, that type of programming. Learning is teaching. If you're going to take a course if you're going to go to a conference, if you're going to just sit and, join a book club and read some books, or you're a podcast evangelist, you love all this stuff, show up at the weekly Lunch and Learn and tell me something in one page, 3 or 4 bullets that you learned this week.
Yeah.
And what those sources are. And that's what CIOs have to do. And then just, take the team back and say, what is our shared understanding of what we just saw and what we just learned? Because, the reality is I could listen to 10 podcasts on digital transformation. They're going to tell me 25 different things to do.
Yes.
And they're not wrong. They're just different perspectives.
Yes.
And now the question is, if you want that shared understanding, what did we hear? What do we want to adopt? What do we want to prioritize? That comes after.
Yes. All right. I got to write this down. Here. You said here, prioritize, and
adopt.
Adopt. Yes. Love it. Eric, I'm going to turn this over to you. And I actually want to ask you the same question. What's your advice for sharing what you're learning with your team? And then I got one more for you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is doing the lunch and learns. That's something we do on a monthly basis, is with our whole consulting team, is we'll do these lunch and learns. It's not just me sharing, it's also others sharing. But I think the key is to, I love the comment that you made earlier about how, one of the best ways to learn is to teach. And I totally believe that. And that's why I love podcasting, is because I try to bring guests on the show where I know I'm going to learn a lot from. I have to learn from them, and I can then impart that to our clients, to our team members, and that sort of thing. So it's always, it's such a cool thing to do, because you can always find someone smarter than you or know something you don't know.
Absolutely.
The beauty of podcasting. I think podcasters have a unique opportunity to learn a lot and also to teach a lot too. By extension.
Yeah. Oh, fabulous. And we just had a great comment pop up. Friends, share if you have other comments, if you have questions, don't forget to use that comment feature, because we would love to hear from you. If you have a specific question for one of our guests, or a question about other best practices around learning and translating that, bring those up and we'll get those answered for you. So Eric, you're running, especially these 2 like really cool niche podcasts, plus a few other pieces of content you're putting out into the world. As a host, who are your inspirations? Where are you learning? I know you just mentioned your guests, awesome, but what are your other inspirations for what you're learning?
Yeah. So I mean, so just to back up, I mean, I'm part of the reason I might be the newest podcaster in this panel is because I'm an introvert. B, I don't actually like being on camera, which is for me, because I have a
welcome.
Yeah, I know. I didn't know I was going to be on camera here, so I wasn't ready for this conversation. Just kidding. But I think, so I have to learn, what I do is I look to the outside of our industry, honestly, to get inspiration for how to be a good host, because I think the best hosts out there they certainly have big personalities. They're entertaining themselves, but they have a way of asking questions and getting the guest to be the star of the show. And so I actually don't watch a lot of podcasts or content, although I have three new podcasters I need to follow here, because I'm enjoying the conversation so far and I'm not familiar with these podcasts. But I typically look outside our industry and I'll look to stuff that's totally unrelated, like Joe Rogan. I mean, he's the biggest podcaster in the world. So what can I learn from Joe Rogan about what makes him unique? Why do people like him? Why do people like his guests? And he's one of those people that has a unique way of getting a guest just to go be a star. But ironically, he's the star. Joe Rogan is the star. So I watch him. I watch Pat McAfee on the sports side. I'll go to some extreme, like on politics, not to get too political, but one podcaster I like his style because I'm so not like him is Steve Bannon. He's got the Steve Bannon War Room. He's just such a off the rails, like entertaining, sort of deep dive, controversial sort of podcaster that I like, kind of learning, like, how could I not get political, but how could I bring in like some of those elements of being a good podcaster and make it somewhat entertaining for our space? Because I think one of the problems with our space in digital transformation is we tend to get real techie, back to Isaac's point, 25 different ways of doing things. It's very prescriptive. It's very academic a lot of times. So how can we make it more digestible and entertaining for people so that they want to watch and they want to learn? And how can we do this in a way that we're not overcomplicating something that we've overcomplicated over the last few decades?
Yes, that's wonderful. And I do the same thing. When I was starting my podcast, I listen a lot to Tim Ferriss. And so Tim Ferriss, he wrote the 4 Hour Work Week, and his podcast has taken off since then. And his episodes are an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. And I listen to them and I digest them in small chunks. Actually, my personal rule is I get on the rowing machine. I can only listen to Tim Ferriss on the rowing machine for 30 to 45 minutes at a time. But because those are like my little learning cadences. But with Tim's episodes, what he does, so he breaks down the performance of world-class performers as kind of his tagline. And I didn't want to create a show that was these high-level success stories, where it's, oh, I worked really hard and it just took a long time. And then, one time I cried and then bam, bam, I'm a bagillionaire. There's a lot of podcasts that are very superficial success stories, and I didn't want to create that. So I replicated Tim's process on my podcast, where I'm like, tell me more about the process. And I break it down with very specific questions so that people hear those kind of nitty gritty daily details that go into what for them was a very rough time and how they got through it. But that's a great point. And looking outside your industry, right? Like, one of the best ways to innovate in any industry is pull lessons from other industries into yours, because it allows you to stand out from the crowd. Isaac, you look like you were going to say something or add there.
No, it's exactly one of the recipes out there, is to learn from outside your world.
Yes.
And the only way you can do that is get outside of your world, get outside of your job spec, get outside of what you know on a day-to-day basis, go look at what another industry is doing, particularly in the transformation space. If you're in healthcare, or you're in education, or you're even in government, and you look at what's happened to media and retail and financial services, there's a lot you can pull from that different groups. And just to comment on some of the things Eric also said, I really love the podcasts that bring other guests on. That's the one thing that, show me somebody that you're going to have a conversation with that I can learn from. And then maybe next week I'm not going to watch because I have something else to do, but I'm going to go back to it every time you have somebody who's on that's really, really good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Stefanie, I would add, just as a learner listening to podcasts and maybe hearing an acronym to Eric's point, or like not understanding the lingo, don't be afraid to ask questions. I think sometimes in this space specifically, people get scared that they might not know the answer because they feel like they should, but that's not the mentality that you should have going into things like that. If you hear something on a podcast, look it up or ask someone or connect with someone and be like, what are your thoughts on this? Like, it's okay to ask questions in this space, especially because there isn't one person who is a complete and total expert on anything digital. It's just changing so rapidly. So we all just have to be humbled by the fact that we all need to ask questions.
Yes. Caleb.
Yeah, well, and I mean, on that same thought, where we're talking about, other inspirations in podcasts, I think a thing that makes any great podcast host is curiosity. And sure, maybe I don't know a ton about every single topic, but I know how to understand the questions the audience might have.
Yes.
And I think just going back to the point that was made earlier, that I think that is a skill and a craft that you can look at all sorts of different industries to draw from, and then really the subject matter isn't important as much as the skill of knowing an audience, knowing what questions to ask, having that honest to God curiosity yourself, because your audience, likely if they're tuning in, probably has some degree of curiosity about the thing you're talking about.
Yes. Great point. Great point. And maybe that's part of what unites podcast hosts, is the really good ones are willing to keep that humility, because they have to create humility and curiosity for their audience, because they're a stand-in for that person listening in, to guide that conversation. And maybe that's one of the things that sets us apart, is we're willing to sit there and go, okay, I don't know what that means. Could you say that another way? Lauren, I know this is something you're passionate about, and you spoke to it in the response to your first question, building community. LinkedIn certainly has been a place for many of us to build community over the years, in different ways. And what are some examples from your own life, or that you've heard or you've experienced, about building community because of your podcast or other podcasts? I didn't mean for that to be so multi-layered. I apologize.
Don't worry, I'll make sure I hit on every single layer.
Thank you. Thank you.
I am super passionate about this because our podcast started because of the community of people around the digital shelf. So the Digital Shelf Institute is really focused on brands who are working on the digital shelf in their organizations and working with retailers. And even from my seat when I was on the brand side and talking to other brands, you might not know anyone else who's doing your job. And if we think about pre-COVID times, e-commerce, the digital shelf was new. People didn't really necessarily understand the value, and people in those roles felt really siloed. And so we realized that they wanted to talk to other people who felt the same way, and they had questions about how everyone was figuring it out. And that actually led to the start of the podcast, because they wanted to hear from other people. They wanted to have conversations. They wanted to talk to each other. And that really spiraled into a true community where we actually have a private community where people can join and they can ask each other questions. And people have called me and said they have had coffee chats in their towns because they met someone on our Slack channel from the community. So community is so powerful, because I think we forget sometimes with digital transformation, the humans are at the center of all of this, and we're naturally social, and we naturally want to talk to others about what's happening. I call it e-commerce therapy, where we have events and we bring people together and we just talk about what is happening. Like, how many times did Amazon change their requirements and what do I do about it? Just things like that. And so community has really created a lot of opportunities for our podcast, for our members to really just come together and chat and figure it out and ask those questions and have a safe space to do that with people who know exactly what you're talking about. So for us, it was the reason why the podcast really kind of took off.
Awesome. That's amazing. Well, friends, we've got about quarter till the hour, 20 till the hour, and we're going to talk about AI for a few minutes. Don't forget to put your questions in the comments. We can get to those here in just a few seconds, but I'm going to allow Eric the first right of refusal on this question if you want to take it, and then we'll open up the floor here. But of course, we're talking about digital transformation. We have to talk about AI. Here's where I want to start, because the conversation is how to use it. I want to know first, from your perspective, how should we not be using AI for learning as leaders?
How should we not be using AI for
Yes.
leaders? Well, that's a great question. I'd say, first of all, I mean, you don't want to assume that AI is a substitute for reading a book or having a conversation with watching a podcast, that sort of thing, because AI isn't going to get into all the nuances and all the, some of the details and things you might want to. Now, if you want a quick summary, like about digital transformation or change management, whatever, sure, you can go to AI and have it teach you a little bit about that topic. But if you really want to get into it and understand kind of the art of it, that's something that AI can't really do yet. And that's where I think, we as humans have to up our game and show that we're better than AI and that we can actually outperform AI in some ways. And so I think that's probably the big thing, is not to rely too much on AI and not to replace it, not use it as a tool to replace other ways of learning.
Yeah. Don't bring your AI talking points to the lunch and learn. That's what I heard.
Yeah, exactly.
For everyone here who'd like to share, what are some of the emerging best practices that you're hearing around using AI for learning?
Well, I like to think of to go to a person and say, imagine you walked into the library and there's this wise person sitting there who's read 2/3 of the books. And you can ask them a question and you'll get a starting point to your answer. But she or he doesn't remember what book they read to give you that answer. And they're only giving you about 60, 90 seconds of response time. And you can follow up and learn a little bit more from that. So you're getting a basic understanding of a topic, of a subject, of an area that you're less versed in. And that might make you feel a little bit more productive. And it does. It's certainly a lot faster than going and doing all that initial research up front. But think of it as helping you develop a capability that would have taken you a lot longer or a lot harder to start building up a competency in without having a partner to get you started off. I'm still going to do the research. I'm still going to go find the answers for myself. I'm still going to have to understand how this code works
Yes.
or why this marketing campaign that it suggested is going to give me the results that I'm looking for. But I'm going to accelerate my ability to get to a capability a lot faster in a much broader set of areas than I would otherwise. And that's the AI companion that you can get today.
Oh, great point. And so in learning, there's this thing called the learning ladder, and we begin with unconscious incompetence. So we don't know what we don't know. The next
Wow.
step is conscious incompetence. So basically, we're starting to figure out, man, there's a lot we don't know. Sergey, I see you, and I'll get to you in just a second. The next step is conscious competence. Sorry. So conscious competence is you're at a certain level in your career. You understand what you know. You understand what you don't know. The last level is unconscious competence. Think about that expert. They're actually usually very bad at teaching because it's just so intuitive what they know, their knowledge and their wisdom. It takes a lot for them to teach just because of their level of competence. But what you're speaking to, Isaac, is use AI for those first two steps to kind of accelerate your learning to get you moving faster in that ladder. Sergey, yeah.
Before you move on, there's
Mhm.
one other step after that
Oh.
that I run into all too often, and it's
Okay.
arrogance, right? That or afraid to ask that question because you've reached that ladder. You're at that sea level. You're walking into the board, and everybody is expecting you to have all the answers. And so you develop that sort of shield saying, I know how to answer all the questions. I know how to dodge the bullet. And then you don't go back and find that time to go learn about something in a little bit more depth. And for anybody who has a C level or aspiring to be a C level, that's the risk of failure, that you do not spend the time to go back and learn and redevelop your expertise. Because someone said this, we're always transforming. I wrote that in my book. We're always transforming. It's a great question over here.
Yes,
I think
great
this one's for
point.
Eric.
Yeah. Yeah. So Sergey says, can we use AI as a resource when building a digital transformation project plan or ERP implementation project plan? So I turn that over to the tech leaders on the call. Thoughts?
I could take a first pass at it. I'd say maybe be really careful because back to the point about the wise person that has read 2/3 of the book but can't cite the source. Keep in mind that AI is pulling from flawed inputs here, because if back to the opening segment about 70% failure rates, if AI has learned what I would call imperfect best practices that have led to 70% failures over the years, AI now is going to tell you to do the same thing.
Genius. Yes.
So you have to, that's where you've got to, I don't think there anytime soon we're going to see AI do digital transformation planning well, partially because it doesn't have the inputs to do it. That's where the humans have to do things differently than the way we've always done them. And eventually we'll teach AI those best practices. But right now, AI doesn't know what is making these projects fail. It just knows that that's the norm, and it's going to spit back to you something that's the norm, which is not going to make you successful. So you could use it as a starting point. You could use it as an input, maybe, but I wouldn't put too much stock in it.
Yeah,
I would agree. And I think I was going to say around AI, think about it as an enabler. Like it's a lot of people talk about AI as the strategy. It's not the strategy. It is the enabler that is going to help you do things faster at scale, know where to start. And when you think about learning, if you're like, oh, I don't know about digital transformation, type it into AI and see what they say. And it gives you a thought of where you need to go next, which is a great tool that we have never had in the past, where you'd have to go pick up a book and read it and be like, I don't know where to start. Let me go figure something else out. It really allows you, or anyone who doesn't have any knowledge or just doesn't know where to go, a starting point. I kind of think about it as it gets your piece on the game board, and then you use your resources and your network and all of your other tools to really kind of progress you down that game. But think about it that way. Just ask it a question. Don't take it as gospel, but then figure out what is the next question you need to ask and where do you go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think, in the same vein as using it as a brainstorming tool or sounding board for ideas. especially a lot of business leaders might not, especially if they're not plugged into a community, might just say, hey, I need some sort of feedback or input here to run this idea about, or is this factual, or is this even possible? Ask it questions, understanding the source, understanding the inputs are flawed, but use it, as just a way to sort of ideate, I think is a powerful tool. Or again, if you want that jumping off point, educating yourself enough to be able to have a conversation with someone who actually is an expert that you can walk through. But building a project plan, I don't know. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of the AI generated art or video out there. I know I've seen some pretty terrible ones. Everyone can always tell when an AI's made it, when you've tried to replace. And I would say the same is going to go for a project plan. Yeah, it might give you some general principles that maybe you can start to work off of. But in terms of actually executing, getting in the details, it's really not a replacement for the expertise that people bring.
Yeah. Isaac, one last thought before I close us up for the hour.
Well, I would just echo what Eric was saying. I mean, one thing you can do with AI, I mean, I talk about all the things that you have to be careful of. You can show it, you can express to it what your high level plan is. I'm doing an ERP upgrade. Here are my 15 steps, poke holes in it. Tell me what I'm missing. Right. And that's a good use case for using an AI technology. Or you might go back and say, here are my 15 steps. How do I go about solving one of them? I really don't know where to start at. So when you can drill in and give it a lot of context and a lot of detail, it can sometimes give you some steps that you might not have thought about. But every transformation I've done is a little bit different. Every ERP upgrade I've ever done is a little bit different. All that context it's missing, and it's just aggregating and summarizing it for you. So it comes back to, who are you networking with? Who are you learning from? Who are you sharing with that can give you some insight? How are you doing this together? And then how do you bring back to the team and saying, well, we're upgrading the ERP and we're going from, I don't know, PeopleSoft to something else. And, what are we forgetting about? Oh, we haven't put change management in. Is that important? Well, I think so. So, having that conversation with the group, you'd be surprised how many people say, oh, we don't need to do that. They'll figure it out themselves. There's a lot of things you can do to help you kind of fill out your project plan, but it comes back to working with your team and bringing in your experts in your network to fill in, what am I missing and what should I be focused on?
Yeah, fabulous. And that goes back to what we started this conversation with. There's a lot of channels, there's a lot of media out there if you want to consume, right? AI can be for consumption. We get insight from each other. We get connection from each other. We get knowledge and wisdom from each other in communities. So with that, we're going to wrap up the conversation here. Thank you for being with us, for participating, for listening in. I have so enjoyed this conversation. Eric and I are the complete opposite human beings. I'm an extrovert, but we have connected. That is the beauty of these conversations.
Absolutely.
And as a reminder, you will get an email tomorrow with links to subscribe to these wonderful podcast hosts and teachers, their media that they're putting out. And we hope that you'll join us over on the Digital Transformation Broadcast Network, where we're curating even more thought leaders together around digital transformation. One of our podcast hosts will not be AI, but you can sign up for our launch in March at digitaltransform.tv, where we'll have more news for you as it is available. So thank you all again. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day, rest of your week, and keep that learning going. And we can't wait to hear what you do with what you've learned from this conversation. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining Digital Dialogue. Look for more episodes at noon Eastern Time on most Tuesdays of every month. Can't join the live session? You can watch the replay anytime on our YouTube channel.